The Ironblood Kingdom was a place that had forgotten how to be happy. The stone walls of its great palace were tall and cold. The corridors were quiet. The servants moved carefully, like people who had learned, over many years, that noise was not welcome here. And in the highest tower of that palace, a 16-year-old boy sat alone by the window, every single morning, listening to the world he could no longer see. His name was Leoric. He was the son of Alpha King Calum Draveth, the strongest and most feared ruler in all the Packlands. But Leoric himself was not feared. He was simply quiet. He had been blind since he was 7 years old, when a terrible attack on the border took away his sight in a single, terrible moment. Before that, people said he was a joyful child. He used to run through the palace gardens laughing, chasing fireflies in the summer evenings. But that boy had not been seen in 9 years. What sat at the window now was someone older, someone careful, someone who had built walls around himself so thick that even his father's voice could not always reach him. King Calum loved his son, that much was certain. But love, when it is mixed with guilt, does strange and painful things. Calum had signed the travel order for that border trip. He had sent his 7-year-old boy into a place that was not safe, and though many people told him it was not his fault, he did not believe them. So instead of opening his heart to Leoric, he closed it into a fist. He controlled everything around the prince. He hired tutors, guards, and healers. He ordered silence in the corridors. He canceled the laughing feast, a joyful autumn celebration that the kingdom had held for generations, every single year, for 9 years in a row. He thought he was protecting his son. He did not understand that he was also keeping his son trapped. It was on one of those quiet autumn mornings that a new person arrived at the palace gate. His name was Soren Ashvale. He was 17 years old, an Omega from a small and mostly forgotten clan, and he carried nothing but a worn brown bag and a reputation for being unusually, almost strangely calm. The head chamberlain, a sharp woman named Lady Vrael, walked him through the palace hallways and gave him the rules in a flat, businesslike voice. The prince did not like noise. He did not like to be touched. He did not like people who felt sorry for him. He had not spoken more than necessary to any visitor in 3 years. Soren listened to all of this without blinking. Then he asked one quiet question. Does he dislike silence? Or does he dislike what people usually fill it with? Lady Vrael stopped walking. She had no answer for that. She brought him to the East Tower and left him there. Leoric heard the door open. He heard new footsteps, light ones, unhurried. He heard the sound of a chair being pulled out, and then he heard nothing at all. The new person simply sat down. He did not say hello. He did not offer a formal greeting. He did not explain who he was or why he was there. He just sat. For 40 minutes, neither of them spoke. The wind came through the window. A hawk circled the courtyard below. The palace held its usual careful silence. Then Leoric said, without turning his face from the window, "You don't smell like pity." Soren said simply, "I'm not sorry for you." Leoric turned his head slightly, not quite toward the sound, but close. "Good," he said. It was the most he had said to any new person in a very long time. That evening, King Calum called Soren to the throne room. He studied the young Omega the way a man studies something he does not yet understand but already suspects. He told Soren, in a low and steady voice, that Leoric was the only heir to the Ironblood throne. He was to be kept safe above all other things. If Soren did anything at all, that caused the prince distress, he would be removed from the kingdom immediately. Soren met the king's eyes and did not look away. He offered no dramatic promise of loyalty. He said only, "I will not lie to him." Calum, who had built his entire kingdom on careful and calculated words, found that answer deeply unsettling. He dismissed Soren, but that night he quietly doubled the guards around the East Tower. The days that followed were made of small, simple things. Soren came every morning and every afternoon. He did not try to fix Leoric. He did not bring false cheerfulness or rehearsed words of encouragement. He simply read aloud, not from dry royal textbooks, but from whatever he found interesting, the travel notes of a long-dead explorer, an old almanac of stars, letters between two merchants who had apparently argued for 40 years about the price of salt. Sometimes, he described things he could see from the window, the behavior of the hawk, the color of the clouds, the way the light moved across the courtyard stones. Today the windows are doing something unusual, Soren said one afternoon, about 5 weeks in. The light is so gold it looks like something the world is apologizing with. Leoric was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "What is it apologizing for?" Soren thought about it honestly. "Everything it could not protect," he said. Leoric said nothing else. But Soren noticed, the following morning, that the prince had moved his chair 3 feet closer to where Soren usually sat. He said nothing about the chair. He simply began his reading from his new position, as though nothing had changed. That was the thing about Soren. He noticed everything, and made a fuss about nothing. It was exactly what Leoric needed, and had never been given before. On the 48th night, a powerful storm hit the valley. Thunder rolled through the mountains in long, heavy waves. Inside the East Tower, Leoric was on the floor, his back against the cold wall, his breathing too fast and too shallow. No one knew about this. Not his father, not Lady Vrael, not a single guard. The sound of thunder, for Leoric, was not just weather. It was memory. It was the sound of the border attack, the explosion, the screaming, the moment the world went dark and stayed that way. Soren slipped past the night guard on instinct. He had heard something, or perhaps he had simply felt something, the way people sometimes do when another person they care about is in distress. He entered the tower, found Leoric on the floor, and made one quiet decision. He did not call for help. He sat down on the floor beside the prince, not touching him, just close, and he began to talk. Not to distract, not to lecture. He simply described the storm as though it were happening somewhere far away, to things that could handle it. "The lightning just hit the old oak at the edge of the forest," he said. "It split straight down the middle. That tree was probably 300 years old." Leoric's breathing slowed. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Trees?" Soren considered it carefully. "I think things that old are past hurting. I think they just open." When the storm passed, and Leoric was sitting upright again, he said quietly, "Don't tell my father." Soren paused. "I told you I would not lie to him," he said. Leoric went very still. "But," Soren added, "I will not offer what he doesn't ask." It was the first compromise they had made for each other. Both of them understood, without saying it, that something had changed between them, something small, and something permanent. On the 62nd day, Leoric asked Soren to go to the portrait gallery and describe the painting of him as a child, the one that hung at the far end of the hall, the one no one had talked about in years. Soren went, carrying a candle. He stood before the painting for a long time. In it, 7-year-old Leoric was reaching out toward something, a painted firefly, golden and small, with a look of absolute certainty on his face, as though he already knew he would catch it. Soren came back and described it plainly and honestly, the way he described everything. "You're reaching for something," he said. "You look like you're absolutely certain you'll catch it. You look like it hasn't occurred to you yet that some things don't get caught." Leoric was silent for a long moment. Then, very carefully, he asked, "Do I look happy?" The word was fragile in his mouth, like something he no longer fully trusted. Soren thought about the painting again. "You look like someone who hadn't been taught yet that the world could disappoint him," he said. "I think that version of you was very lucky." Leoric said nothing. But for the first time in 9 years, so briefly that it almost didn't happen, the corner of his mouth moved upward. It was around this time that trouble arrived at the palace, in the shape of a man named Lord Brennan, from a neighboring pack called Stonegate. He came for a political summit and brought with him grand ambitions, chief among them, a plan to tie his family to the Ironblood throne through a match involving Leoric. He was polished and confident, and very good at saying things that sounded reasonable while meaning something else entirely. He watched Soren carefully from the first day. He saw the way Leoric's posture changed when Soren entered a room. He saw a quiet bond that was stronger than any guard or any wall, and he understood that Soren stood in the way of everything he wanted. He created false letters, carefully written, expertly aged, that claimed Soren had been passing information about Leoric to a rival pack. The evidence was elegant and completely untrue. He presented it to King Calum with the calm concern of a man who hated to deliver bad news. Calum read the letters. He looked at the signatures, and the part of him that was a king, not a father, but a king, made the decision before the part of him that was a father could speak. Soren was removed from the palace, not imprisoned, not accused publicly, simply escorted to the border and released, with his worn bag and nothing else. Leoric was told only that Sorin had been sent away for the safety of the kingdom. He did not shout. He did not argue. He simply walked back to the East Tower and sat at the window. But anyone who looked at him closely could see that something had gone wrong, not in his expression, but behind it. He was absent in a way he had not been even in the worst years. He had been beginning to come back, and now the road was gone. Lady Vrael said to the king, with a directness she had never used before in 30 years of service, "Your son was beginning to smile again, and you have just sent away the only person who could reach him." Calum said nothing, but he heard it. Sorin walked into the Ashwood Forest alone, and found the ruins of his family's home by nightfall, a few broken stones, a chimney standing without a house, and one old ashvale tree that had grown wild and large over decades of being watched by no one. He sat beneath it. He did not make a sound. Grief, for him, had always been a quiet thing that lived deep inside rather than spilling outward. He thought about Leoric. He thought about the chair that had moved 3 feet, and the storm, and the word happy, spoken in a voice that was so careful around it. And he made one quiet decision. He would find a way back. Not because he was told to, because Leoric was real, and real things deserved to be returned to. 12 days after Sorin's removal, Lady Vrael found the crack in Lord Brennan's story. One of the supposed contacts named in the letters had died 4 years ago. A dead man could not have written correspondence dated recently. She placed the evidence on the king's desk without a single word of commentary. Calum read it once. He read it again. Then he sat very still for a long time, and the weight of what he had done settled on him fully. Before he rode into the Ashwood, he went to Leoric's tower. He sat in Sorin's chair. He said, without any royal framing, "I am going to find him." Leoric turned his face toward his father, fully, directly. "He was falsely accused," Calum said. "I know that now." A long pause. Then Leoric said quietly, "I knew it 12 days ago." Calum looked at his son. "How?" he asked. Leoric's voice was steady. "Because I have spent 9 years learning to hear truth in the way people breathe. And Sorin has never breathed like someone hiding anything." Calum stood. There were many things he wanted to say, and none of them were adequate. "Tell him," Leoric said before his father reached the door, "that the hawk came back. She found what she was looking for." Calum found Sorin sitting beneath the old tree, unhurried and unsurprised. He dismounted alone and walked over. He told the truth, all of it, the false letters, the man behind them, what had been done in consequence. And then, in a voice that had no throne in it at all, he said, "I cannot undo what I did, but my son has not smiled in 9 years. You were making it happen. I destroyed it, and I would like, if you are willing, not to be the reason it does not happen again." Sorin looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up his bag. He entered the East Tower alone. His chair was still there, exactly where he had left it. He sat down. Leoric heard the familiar footsteps, light, unhurried, and went very still. Neither of them spoke, but this silence was different from the very first one. The first silence had been 2 strangers being careful around each other. This one was 2 people who knew each other well enough to understand that some moments are too large for immediate words, and need to be allowed to settle first. After a very long time, Leoric said, "The hawk's nest is in the split oak." Sorin said, "That's where she was looking." "She has eggs," Leoric said. 4 of them. I heard them move this morning. They sat with that for a while, with the news of new and fragile things beginning in the place that had split open. Then Sorin said carefully, "Do you know what the Ashvale gift does? The old promise?" Leoric said yes. He had spent the past 12 days reading everything he could find. He knew. "Then you know," Sorin said, "that I would not use it lightly." "I know," Leoric said. Sorin took a slow breath. He spoke quietly, not loudly, not with ceremony, just with the weight of someone who understood exactly what they were doing. "Hear me," he said. "You will not always be in the dark, not because the darkness will leave, but because you will carry enough of yourself forward that you will know, even there, who you are. I promise you that." The words were simple. They were soft, but they landed in the room the way a stone lands in still water, spreading outward, changing everything they touched. There was no sudden magic, no golden light filling the room. What happened was smaller than that, and more permanent. Leoric Draveth, 16 years old, blind since 7, not smiled at anything in 9 years, smiled. It was slow, the way a door opens that has not been used in a very long time. It was small. It did not take over his whole face. It was just the corner of his mouth, moving upward, and then a little more. And the way he turned his head toward Soren was the way a person turns toward warmth after spending a long time in the cold. Soren looked at him. He did not celebrate. He did not make it into something larger than it was. He just looked, with the same calm honesty he had always used, and said very quietly, "There you are," Leoric said. "I didn't know I was gone." "You weren't," Soren said. "You were just waiting." Lord Brennan's deception was made public within the Pack Council, and he returned to his territory in quiet disgrace. Calum reinstated the Laughing Feast, not with announcement or fanfare, but as a small, private thing. A table in the East Tower garden, a meal with no titles, an afternoon with no politics. He sat at it. So did Lady Vrael, who cried once and immediately pretended she had not. The hawk circled overhead from the split oak, where 4 eggs were slowly, patiently becoming something new. Soren described the autumn light the way he always did. The gold kind. The kind that looks like the world is glad. "What is it saying this time?" Leoric asked. Soren looked at the table, at the king who was trying to act like a regular person, and mostly failing, at the sky, at the oak. "Nothing," he said. "I think today, it is just glad." Leoric was quiet for a moment, and then, easier now, more familiar, like a thing that had remembered how to work, he smiled again.